name is Justine, and I'm going to be talking today about the impacts of urbanization on plant-pollinator interactions and the benefits of pollinator-focused community science activities. And then again, before we begin the presentation, I would like to take a moment to do a land acknowledgement. Our slides are, there we go. Yeah. Okay, so I want to take this opportunity to gratefully acknowledge where we are gathered here today, which is the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region, including the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Districts 5 and 6, and the place we are all gathered here today, we can call Mohkinstsis, which is now known as the City of Calgary. So I just want to share a few things with you as well. This map here in the background that I have is from nativeland.ca. It is a good resource to have if you're ever traveling or wherever you are, just to check in on the traditional territories where you are visiting. And I also want to share a quote with you from one of my favorite books, from Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Wall-Kammerer. She is a professor at the New York University, and it's that experiments are not about discovery, but about listening and translating the knowledge of other beings. So this is a quote that I kind of carry with me as I go forward in my career as a scientist, knowing that I'm not discovering anything, I'm simply learning from all of the beings around me. And I would just like to do a few additional acknowledgements, like my supervisors, my committee members, members of my lab, City of Calgary, Sustainability Office at the University of Calgary, as well as thank you all for being here today, and thank you for having me. Awesome, so a little bit of an outline of my presentation today. I'm going to be talking about biodiversity, pollinators, and plants, and how urbanization kind of all ties into that. And then I will give a little bit of an update into my research. I'm about like halfway done my master's right now, so it's some preliminary results of what I found on my data collection as well as my community science events. So with that, we'll start with global and urban biodiversity. So you may know that biodiversity refers to all living things on Earth or in an ecosystem. And more than not, often than not, we are the cause for this big shift and change in global biodiversity. We have a lot of species loss, land use change, many pollinators and other animals and things are becoming endangered due to human activities. So this is something that is affecting all ecosystems worldwide, as well as climate change. Is really affecting global biodiversity at a very large scale. We have urban biodiversity as well. Yeah. So in urban areas, these are areas that are more often disturbed by human intervention than our natural areas. We have lots and lots of land use changes. So compared to our natural areas, everyone has come in, we've built cities, we've laid a lot of pavements, all of that, and that's changing our habitats for all the wildlife around us. And not only that, there's less green spaces, they are now farther apart. So this is more difficult for any type of animal, as well as pollinators to move between and forage and find habitat if these green spaces, which they find refuge in, are farther apart. So in our urban spaces, biodiversity is often lower than it is in rural spaces. And we also want to look into the functional biodiversity in these spaces and seeing how these different species in cities and urban areas are not only existing, how they're interacting with one another. The focus of my presentation is mostly going to be on pollinators and plants. Quick definition, pollinators can be birds, bats, bees, moths, anything that transfers pollen from the male part of one plant to the female part of the other, facilitating pollination. Pollination can also be done by the wind, depending on the plant species there are. pollination is essential to plant reproduction, and a lot of things build on up the food chain from there. So pollination is very essential for all life. You may have heard that pollinator populations are declining worldwide. And again, this can be due to a number of factors: climate change, the land use changes, habitat loss, things like that. And I do want to make an important note. You probably have heard the phrase "save the bees" before. That's pretty common. And when we say "save the bees," we're meaning our native bees. So often when we think of a bee, it's a honeybee that comes to mind. And those honeybees are actually imported over from Europe, and they're used as farm animals, basically for crop pollination and honey production. So those honeybees are doing just fine. When we say "save the bees," we're talking about our native bees, like bumblebees, mining bees, leafcutter bees, things like that. So with different pollinators, they will provide different pollination services. So this is why it's important to protect and help out all of pollinator diversity, and not just a few species. This is essential for our food security as well. A lot of our food is created through pollinators. So if you had any fruits or veggies today, you can thank a pollinator for that. Yeah, some of our native plants in Alberta rely on a few specific species of pollinators, and vice versa. Some pollinators are rare and they only rely on a few specific plants. So not only preserving the larger biodiversity, also looking at our rare species, they can affect more than just one thing as well. So a few examples of our specialized pollination. We have our tongue length and flower shape. So our butterflies, they have the long tongues, and they can pollinate and have nectar from the long tubular flowers. Whereas on the top left there, is the picture moving? No, it's not. Normally the picture moves, but the bee is shaking, and that's called buzz pollination. So there's specific types of plants that can only be pollinated by bumblebees with this buzz pollination. So they vibrate their wings really fast to release the pollen. That's quite common with plants in the nightshade family. So if you ever hear somebody told you to tickle your tomatoes, that's why. It kind of shakes the flower a little bit to loosen up the pollen. Yeah, we also have moths that pollinate flowers at night. Believe it or not, wasps also pollinate as well. So, so kind of along this theme of pollinators and urbanization, in our urban areas, we do have a higher rate of biodiversity loss than in our rural areas or protected areas. And urbanization in particular has a large effect on our pollinators. If you think of our bees, they're quite small, so they can't go very far. And having our green spaces farther apart can be very difficult for our bees. So we have different foraging ranges for different types of bees. So our honeybees that are introduced or from Europe, they're pretty good at flying far distances. They can fly up to about 10 kilometers, give or take. Could be more sometimes, but on average, they have a foraging distance of about 10 kilometers, so they can get pretty far anywhere within the city. But if you think of our native bees, like our bumblebees and our smaller solitary bees, their max range could be about 2 to 3 kilometers. Sometimes our smallest solitary bees can only go about 200 meters before they need to stop and find some more flowers and nectar. Because foraging is expensive, right? They need to stop and visit these flowers in order to basically survive. So with urbanization, and we have all of these inhospitable environments created for our pollinators, it's really hard for them to navigate in the city when we don't have enough resources for them. Yeah, that's good. Are both native and introduced plants are good for pollinators. So in the city, if we can start creating these pollinator hotspots, even on like every street corner, we have plants, whether they're native or non-native. This will help with that foraging distance issue. So if you're planting even just a few ornamental plants in your yard, that's helpful instead of just having no flowers at all. However, we have recently found in literature, more so in Europe, there hasn't been too much in Canada yet, a little bit in the States, that native plants are actually supporting more pollinators than introduced plants. This is likely, we've hypothesized that it's likely due to the coevolution of these plants and pollinators developing this interdependent relationship over time. So when you are planting your garden or your flower bed and things like that, if you're planting flowers, you're already doing great. If you're planting native flowers, you may be supporting that rare bumblebee species or that rare solitary bee that needs those native flowers and depends on them. And again, that kind of ties into the functional diversity of these native plants and pollinators. They may have this greater functional diversity than our introduced species because they have co-evolved for so long. I do just want to touch a little bit more on the different types of plants in our environment. We have a number of different types of plants. We have our native, introduced, invasive, and naturalized. So again, our native plants are plants that have grown and evolved in this environment for a long, long time before we were here. And then we have our introduced plants. So these are plants that have been brought over most commonly from Europe, Eurasia, and introduced into this environment. So those can be kind of categorized into one of three things. They can be simply our introduced plants. We have a lot of invasive plants as well. These are introduced plants that have been brought over, introduced to our environment, and they have loved it here, and they have taken off. So these plants have a very high reproduction rate. They have a lot of seeds that they put out. They can reproduce really quickly. They may have seeds that are viable for a long time, and they can outcompete our native plants. As we are seeing, you'd have a yard in Calgary. You may not or may not have purple or creeping bellflower in your yard. Once it's there, it's very, very hard to get rid of. Another, I guess, category of our introduced plants are our naturalized plants. So this, for example, would be dandelions. So those have been brought over to North America. However, we kind of accept them as part of our ecosystem now because they are very, very important for our early spring pollinators. Our dandelions are often the first thing that pop up in the spring, and we recognize the importance of those for our pollinators. And they're not overly invasive, but they are not native to North America. I do just want to mention one more thing. A lot of times when people are planting their garden or they're out hiking, we often equate the term wildflower to a native plant. And a lot of seed sellers and distributors will do this too. They'll call it a wildflower mix. And I just want to let you know to be very careful when you're buying these wildflower mixes, that some of them do contain invasive species. So just make sure that when you're buying a wildflower mix, that it's from somewhere local. I do have some seed packets from ALCLA and Wild About Flowers. Those are two very good local native plant distributors in Calgary if you are looking to buy native seeds. But this is one thing where kind of corporations are contributing to this issue. They're marketing something as a wildflower mix. People don't know there are invasive species in there. They're planting them in their garden, and then it's taking over their yard and creating bigger issues. Again, in our urbanized areas, we do have a higher proportion of these non-native invasive plants because we as humans kind of aggregate here and create that environment. We do have different, even within Calgary, we have differing levels of urbanization. You can see in our pictures here, we have Nose Hill, we have suburbs, and we have downtown. So those are kind of 3 degrees of urbanization we have in Calgary here. And that I've kind of incorporated into my work. Looking at different green spaces in these areas, these green spaces have different qualities and different benefits for wildlife in general and our pollinators. So if you think about Nose Hill, for example, this is a natural grassland. And it will most likely have a better support for pollinators and other wildlife than any manicured park that's downtown or in the suburbs. So in our natural areas, we're not mowing any grass, we're not spraying any pesticides, we're not constantly disturbing the wildlife. So a lot more pollinators and wildlife can exist there without being disturbed versus a park downtown that's maybe the grass is cut every week or something and the leaves are raked up, the trees are pruned regularly, things like that. You know, we might think it looks pretty, but it's really not helping anyone other than us. So that's hopefully where we can see like going towards in the future of the city of Calgary is like having a more natural approach to parks. I think we're sort of on a good route there. We have some naturalization projects going on in Calgary. They're planting some natural grassland and wildflower patches along the highways. People are having mixed feelings about it in Calgary, but had some people mow them down. But I think it was just the missing thing is our communication with people, why we're doing this, and what it's for, rather than someone just thinking, oh, there's long grass there, maybe I should go cut it. But if there's long grass with a sign that says, hey, pollinators are living here, please don't hurt me. People might think twice before they just go mow that grass. Yeah, so here's an example. We have our friend over here on the left. This guy likes to mow his lawn every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. He has a jugger round up there, the weed whacker. He thinks his yard looks great. However, it's kind of a dead zone for pollinators and any other wildlife. You can see we have a few bugs over here, a single bird. Whereas his neighbor over here, we have like a native grass and wildflower yard. Have a little bit, a water corridor that goes through their yard, some trees, and some shrubs, some longer grass. They don't cut all of their grass. You can see there's a lot more pollinators and wildlife over there. So just sort of a pictograph example of how an individual can make a difference for wildlife and pollinators in our city. So this isn't something like, oh, I'm gonna maybe not use this one single straw and I'm gonna save the turtles. It does help, but this is one way you as an individual can make a huge difference for wildlife in the city by creating that hospitable zone where they can exist. So in general, if we have a high level of urbanization, there's a few things we have to look through on this slide. Sorry. In urban areas, we often have a higher level of non-native and invasive plants, as well as our we have a few more our non-native pollinators as well. We have quite a few honeybees as well, because honeybees are where humans are. In urban areas, we often have less native plants due to our invasive plants outcompeting them. And also when we develop areas, our native plants aren't usually the first ones to overtake that area. They're beat by the non-natives. And as a result, we have a decrease in our native pollinators in our urban areas. So what can we do to change all of these red arrows? We can increase our native plants in the city, and this will have an effect on both of our native pollinators. It will also still be beneficial for our non-native pollinators as well. Honeybees are pretty generalist, so they'll be happy with any pollen. And hopefully, if we have more of our native plants, they will kind of aggregate together as a community and be able to not be as affected by our non-native and invasive plants. So that's just kind of the intro background of all of what my project is about. So the first part of my project, I'm looking at the impacts of urbanization on our plant-pollinator relationships. So I'm doing this through iNaturalist. I'm not sure if you've heard of that before. It's a community citizen science platform. And for my project, we're going out throughout the city, taking pictures of pollinators, just any insect on a flower, uploading it to iNaturalist, and then using that database from there. A little bit more about Calgary. So we have observations taken all over the city. And this is what Calgary looks like when you look at the surface cover. So with my project, I am categorizing urbanization in terms of permeable and impermeable surfaces. So our permeable surfaces, if we can just go to the next slide. Our permeable surfaces, for example, down here, we have a park, we have grass, we have some flowers, water can go wherever it needs to, versus our impermeable surface up here. We still do have some plants and flowers along, I think that's Stephen Ave. But you can see there's like water pooling on the pavement below, there's nowhere for it to go. And we often think of our impermeable surfaces, downtown concrete, things like that. The concrete also can have an urban heat island effect, so it's a little bit warmer. Maybe pollinators don't like that as much, regardless of if there's plants there or not. Calgary does have, it's over 80% of impermeable surfaces, so if you think about it, that is a lot and a lot of concrete. You can just go to the next slide. So yeah, 82%, and it's over 800 square kilometers. So you can think of that, huge. If we're looking at our permeable surfaces, so where we have natural areas, whether they're parks, our permeable areas, 75% of those are manicured. So 75% of that, we mow quite often, we rake up the leaves, we use pesticides, herbicides, things like that. Only 3% of Calgary is actually natural cover. So 3% of 825 square kilometers. I think we can hopefully do better than that in the future, and start having these native or natural spaces come back if we can have kind of reclaimed areas that are better habitat for our not only pollinators but other wildlife. Another like an analogy that I like to use is think about us driving around in Calgary on all our roads. We have quite a bit of infrastructure for our cars. Calgary's a commuter city, and even then, sometimes it's inconvenient to get from place to place. We hardly have any infrastructure at all for wildlife or pollinators, so it must be very, very difficult for them to get around in our city. And I think that we need to help them out a little bit and create some more green space for them. Yeah, so that's kind of the background on my project. The overall arching of the research I'm doing is to characterize plant-pollinator relationships in Calgary. We're using community science. My first question that I'm asking is how does urbanization cause declines in functional biodiversity as measured by plant-pollinator interactions? Secondly, looking at if native plants are preferred by pollinators over non-native plants. And third, I wanted to look more into the social science of community and citizen science. So I'm looking at the impacts and community benefits of pollinator-focused citizen science activities. So often in academia, we look at the benefit for academia. What can everyone do for us? I'm more interested in how can community science benefit everyone else. So this is just a quick predictions of what I hope or what I think we're going to see in Calgary. So we're thinking that as we have more and more impermeable surfaces, we're going to see less unique plant pollinator interactions. So we're looking at unique interactions of like insect species interacting with plants. We're going to have lower biodiversity as we have more impermeable surfaces. And kind of the opposite, as we have more natural surfaces, we're going to have more diverse interactions. And then for our native plants, we're predicting that because these plants have co-evolved, they're going to have more unique species interaction than our non-native plants. And yeah, we have here, our native plants will have more unique interactions versus our non-native plants. And I do just want to kind of specify this unique plant pollinator interaction metric that I'm using. So, if we want to advance the slide, yeah. Oh, all at once. Okay. So for example, let's say we have our cosmos interacting with our clouded yellows. We have our rudbeckia, which is a co-flower, interacting with our dronefly. we have a cosmos and a bumblebee, and then we would have a prairie crocus with a bumblebee. Those would be 4 unique interactions, and our fifth, if we have another cosmos and another bumblebee, we would still only have 4 unique interactions. I'm doing this because I am using community science data. It's not really the typical scientific method of you do a count in a square, you sit there for 5 minutes and see how many pollinators come into your square. A lot of people are taking pictures in their backyard, and if they have, let's say, a sage plant in their backyard, and they take pictures every day of hunt bumblebee on that sage plant, I could have 200 observations of that one interaction, but it's really only one species of bumblebee with one species of sage. So in order to avoid kind of that observer bias and multiple interactions, this is how we're kind of structuring my analysis. So in Calgary, in order to kind of simplify the modeling that I'm doing at the moment, I've divided Calgary up by postal code zones, otherwise known as forest rotation areas. And all of these, it's kind of hard to see, all of these little points here are plant-pollinator interactions from the iNaturalist database. So I have taken that initial map of Calgary that I had with all of the impermeable and permeable surfaces and calculated the percentage of impermeable surface for each postal code region in Calgary. And I'm going to be comparing them to each other to see what the pollinator diversity is in each area of the city, depending on how much impervious surface is in each postal code area. So I'm looking at richness and then the number of unique plant pollinator interactions. And then just currently doing a linear model of my data. Haven't really gotten into the extensive modeling yet, but this is what we have so far. So similar to my predictions, we found that plant pollinator interactions, the number of them decrease as we have more and more impermeable surface. So I was really excited to see that this result was actually significant. So as we have more and more impermeable surfaces in Calgary, we do have less pollinator diversity and diversity of these interactions between plants and pollinators. And then next, I looked at natural surface color. So if we think of our surfaces, we have our impermeable and then our permeable. Within the permeable is our manicured surfaces and our natural. So our natural surface is a little bit, it's not quite the opposite of our impermeable, but it's pretty close. And this one, we didn't really see any trend. It wasn't significant. It kind of looks like in any area of the city, if you have impermeable surface, you will have some unique interactions, but it doesn't have a significant relationship like I thought. Again, I have only analyzed half my data set, so this might change in the next couple months. Yeah, and then for my native plants, so far we've seen that native plants do support a slightly higher number of pollinators than our non-native plants. Again, this is just my early analysis. I did do a little bit of stats, and this result is significant so far. I'm hoping to see that this stays the same as I get further into my analysis, but it's looking good. So if we can, again, be planting any type of plant in your yard, great. If they're native plants, even better. And then lastly, I just want to talk about the community science project, Calgary Pollinators, what I've been doing this last summer, and the results of the community science survey that I sent out to see what the actual benefits that people are reporting. So community versus citizen science, there's a little bit of a difference between those two terms, but in general, citizen science is a collaboration between the general public and scientists to collect and analyze data. As often is done with larger data sets. We have a lot of just like person power to go out and collect all these data. And it's really awesome. However, citizen science is often very individualistic. You go out, you collect data, you upload it by yourself, and then people can use it from there. I wanted to kind of change that and have more of a community approach where we can all go out and learn together and collect data. And then I'm analyzing that data, but more of a integrated approach where people can collaborate and learn from one another rather than just doing this activity on their own. And with that, I wanted to see what the actual benefits were. So was it better than just collecting data on your own and uploading it on your computer? So again, my prediction is that people that participate in the group community science activities will have a sense of community, will learn more, and have greater benefits than people that participate on their own. So these are a few pictures from this summer. I hosted a number of pollinator walks from April through September. We went to quite a few locations throughout the city. It was a lot of fun. We had about 20 people for each walk, which was way more than I was expecting. About 70 different people in total came to these walks. And that was just the first year. I didn't know how to advertise these walks. I wasn't partners with any groups. I was just like telling as many people as I could. So I'm hoping this summer we'll have an even better turnout at these walks. Basically, we just went out, we had a chat, we took pictures of pollinators. We had a few people with other areas of expertise or interests. We had a bunch of people that were interested in birds and was telling everyone about birds as well, and like lichens and mosses. Everyone was just learning from everyone else, and it was like such a wonderful experience. So hoping to continue that on this summer, even though most of my data collection is already done, but just for the community events, because it was so awesome. Yeah, and this is the Calgary Pollinators project on iNaturalist. It was my goal this year to hit 10,000 observations, and I did it. And then I had to go through and ID 10,000 plants and insects. Well, iNaturalist, they helped with the insects, but yeah, it was a lot of plant ID. It was a lot of late nights looking at photos, but yeah, we've had about 415 observations ID'd to the species level. There's a lot more that are just ID'd to the genus or family. We're not actually collecting the insects, we're just kind of letting them be. That's kind of the give and take with using community science and just taking pictures, is you don't get as detailed of species identification, but that's fine. We had over 865 people contribute to the project and submit observations. I think there was about 600 different plant species that we found, and yeah, a whole bunch of other people ID'd plants and insects as well. Within our project, these are some of the most commonly observed species that we found in Calgary. So most common are our native bumblebees. So those are the bombus species. Most common is our Hunt's bumblebees. We also have a lot of flies and butterflies and some sweat bees as well. But these are not technically the most common in Calgary. They're the most commonly observed. So when we think about that, we do want to think about kind of an observer bias. Our bees are cute and fuzzy, so people are going to take pictures of them more often than maybe a fly or a moth or things like that. But yeah, we have a lot of observations of different species. And these most common species are, a lot of them are generalists. Most namely our bombus, our bumblebees. So our bombus species visited, I think probably 100 different genre of plants. So they are great generalist pollinators, and that's why we need to protect them. We have a few bumblebees that were just added to the endangered list. I think it was this past week. I'm forgetting the species name. But yeah, our bombus. I've also just included our honeybees on here, even though they're not native. They are quite generalist pollinators as well. But the next most common pollinator that has visited the most plants, pollinator maybe by accident, we have our lygus bugs. They're often known as a pest on crops, but there is a chance that they can transfer pollen from one plant to another. So for the sake of my project, considering the pollinators, and then we have quite a few flies. We have our Aristalis, our drone flies, our flower flies. This is a Dialectus, it's a sweat bee. and our green bottleflies. Our butterfly is a Vanessa, what is it called?
Carduli.
Yes, that's one. Then we have our Megapile, our leaf cutter bees, and then Andrina, our mining bees. So those were the most, the pollinators that visited the most plant species that we found in the project. And then we have our plants as well. So in Calgary, these are our most commonly observed plants. This is outside of my project, it's just on iNaturalist, but we do have quite a few native species that people like to take a picture of. We have our prairie crocus, that's usually the one that takes over in the spring on Nose Hill, super beautiful. Yeah, so these are our plant species. Next up on that list, we had quite a few introduced and invasive species, like our alfalfa, dandelions, and then we have quite a few invasive species that are quite prevalent in Calgary. So you've probably seen Canada thistle before. You may have seen the orange peel clematis. Those ones like to grow on like fences and walls and stuff, and they have a lot of fluffy looking flowers. Tartarian honeysuckle, creeping bellflower, it's a big one, tansy, butter eggs, and black henbane. So these are invasive plants that are becoming more and more common in Calgary that we're seeing a lot of. However, when we look at the plants that have the most insect visitors, that have the most like genre of insects, we have a good mixture of our invasive and our native plants. So the most common visited plant was Triticum, which is our dandelions. That makes sense because in the spring they're the only thing out, and our pollinators are going to be loving them. Next we have our roses. So this is inclusive of all 3 species of our wild growth, including the hybrids and things like that. This can also be due to like the flowering times and how long these flowers are flowering by determining how many pollinators they attract. But yeah, we have our roses, we have alfalfa, pollinators love that. Canada thistle, rudbeckia, coneflowers, shrubby cinquefoil, and then we have our blanket flower, solidago, goldenrod, perennial sow thistle, and then our tansy. So we have quite a few native species that are commonly visited by pollinators, but we do have some invasives in there as well. So this is the results of my community science survey. So in October, after I did all of the community events, I said, wow, this is awesome, I feel good. But what's everyone else thinking about the events? So I wanted to know what the feedback from everyone who participated was. I sent out the survey, had over 140 people respond, which was crazy. With the survey questions, these are like multiple choice, so you can select multiple answers. So not everything adds up to 100, as you can see. But I wanted to know, first off, how were people participating in the project? So there are a number of ways to participate. You could do it on your own, you could do it in a group. I was posting stuff on social media, and then people could also identify insects or plants in the project. So the most common way that people participated in the project was on their own, as you can see here. And next, second most common was people identifying insects and plants in the project. I do want to say a thank you to everyone who like ID'd plants and pollinators within the project, because that was like a huge help for me. And they actually did spend like so much time helping ID some bumblebees and other bees as well. And that's something that I am still like developing my skills myself. So I appreciate the people that identified the pollinators within my project. Really awesome. And then we had people who participated in groups on the pollinator walks, took pictures while they were on the walks, and uploaded them to iNaturalist as well. So it was a little bit of a smaller group of participants. However, they seemed to really enjoy it. And the next slide. With all of our participants, no matter if they participated on their own or with the group, the main motivations that people said they participated for was to contribute to the data collection, to learn how to identify biodiversity, and then learn about pollinators in their region. And then a close fourth was learning about pollinators and like how to protect them. But that was what I was interested in. Why did you join? How did you get involved? What were your motivations? And then last, I wanted to look at the benefits. that people reported from participating. So the first question I asked was, did you feel that this project and being involved has helped you improve your insect ID skills? And about close to 80% of people that participated as community, as a group, said yes, whereas about 55% of people participating on their own said yes. And this is inclusive of all people that like ID, that are like experts, that are IDing on iNaturalist and things like that. So they might have already maxed out of their insect ID skills. Yeah, and then secondly, I asked if people had learned something about insects, pollinators, community science, plants, things like that. And 100% of people that participated as a community said yes. So I love to see that, made me really excited. And I was even excited to see that people who participated on their own, close to 90% of them learned something as well. So that was the goal of doing my community outreach and my walks. Love to see it. And that's really why I want to do it again this summer. So yeah, kind of wrapping up at the end here. A couple things you can do to help pollinators. Again, add native plants to your garden. Try to avoid herbicides and pesticides if you can. Advocate for pollinator-friendly spaces, as well as like in your own yard. So helping your yard be more pollinator-friendly, you can not rake up your leaves or wait to rake them up, not cut your grass at all, or you can wait to cut it in the spring, leave it longer. There are bees and other insects nesting in the long grass over winter. We want to make sure that they can stay warm and cozy until it's warm enough outside. You can also participate in community science so we can learn more. So not just my project, there are a whole other array of community science projects out there, whether you're interested in like birds or bats or bears or pollinators, there's a project there for you. And yeah, and share what you know with others. So just knowledge is power, right? And I think we as people often forget that like we are a part of nature. We're kind of far removed from it sometimes, but just reminding people that this environment we live in, we are part of nature and we need to help out other parts of nature if we can. And yeah, so just as a conclusion, everyone can make a difference on their own to help our pollinators and biodiversity. It is something that you can do. In our city, I don't think our urbanization or our amount of concrete is going to change anytime. So if we can help advocate for those spaces, create those spaces for wildlife, it'll definitely be helping biodiversity in our city. And hopefully we can see fewer like species on that endangered list and find just more wildlife in Calgary in general.
Okay, thank you so much, Justine. Very interesting. Do you want to take questions?
Yeah, I would love to.
Are there any questions? Water. Yes, go.
Just like give a sip of water first. Yeah, thanks for the presentation. That was awesome. Are you planning when you're done to like share your results with the city of Calgary?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I just figured like for like even like municipal urban planning, like it could be useful information.
Yeah, and like I've been talking with a couple people in the city of Calgary, and they want to like make a recommendation on like a planting list, like an updated one for native plants and things like that.
Cool.
Yeah, I just thought with looking at some of the invasive species, specifically like Canadian thistle, tansy, I know there are quite some large areas of monocultures in downtown Calgary of those species. And right now the recommendation is to like cut them down, don't let them flower.
Yeah.
Are there any thoughts on like reducing that from our pollinators' diet to not have those expansive flowers if they are just being mowed?
Yeah, so that is definitely something to think about for sure. If we have our invasive species, we don't want to like take them all away and then the pollinators don't have anything. If there is like that big space, it should be managed. As long as we're not taking like every single invasive species away at once, I think it's okay. But yeah, that's definitely something to think about when you're removing and again changing the environment from what it is now to doing that. Ideally, you would cut those down and replace them with native plants or just like a non-invasive plant species, but yeah.
Just cutting those, invasive species, the noxious weed down, they're gonna keep coming back. Some of those
Yeah.
seeds last for 100 years, so
Yeah,
don't worry.
yeah, they'll be back for sure.
This is from someone online. They're asking, how important is access to water for pollinators?
Access to water, I know, like, you may be seeing like putting water out for bees, like sugar water and things like that, is not technically really essential. It may be now that we're likely gonna have another heat wave in summer. But that like sugar water for bees is more of like a honey bee thing, to my understanding. But yeah, if we're having a dry year, pollinators get hot too, so they need like shade and shelter and things like that. But the main thing, they kind of get their water as they go and get nectar and stuff.
From your plant list that you had, for all the results, is there a particular one? Obviously, I think dandelions were the most, but is there like not, silver bullet might be the wrong word, but if someone's going to plant like native plants, is there one or two species that like has a massive impact on pollinators that would be better to plant than say, I don't know, the rest of them?
Yeah, so that's kind of something we run into when we try to make like a recommended plant list, is that we only then get like these 5 species planted in the city. Ideally, you'll have like a diverse mixture of flowers. You'll have maybe 5 species here and a different 5 species over here. I would recommend planting for like your yard, like your soil and your yard type. So if you have like sunny, dry soil that's gravelly, plant native plants that'll do well there. And that'll like, again, help you cut down on your water use too and be a little more environmentally friendly. Or if you have like a shady spot, plant something that's shade tolerant. So I'd say plant for that. If you are looking for recommendations of what native plants to plant, I would talk to like ALCLA or All About Flowers, and they are awesome at making recommendations.
So on that note, AWA actually pulled out all of the invasive and introduced plants that were in the front last summer, and we planted a native plant pollinator garden. So some of the other things that you want to try and think about are having plants that will flower like all season, not just they come and they flower and then there's no other flowers the rest of the season. So try to find plant species that, you know, plant in May, or that bloom in May and June, and another species in July, and another species in August, another species in September. So that you have a diversity of different plants. But yes, understanding, you know, shade tolerance and things like that. If you do have questions, there's a lot of information at the Alberta Native Plant Council, but also I work very closely with ALCLA in order to identify and select plants that are going to be suitable for our area, which is with that huge elm tree out front is quite shaded in one side. So we planted Cornus canadensis in the one side that's very shady, and then a variety of other sort of shade tolerant plants on the other side. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
and we are continuing to plug all the flowers and things like that, which is a fighting thing to do here, because they do come back. It's a never ending thing, that we are working really hard to improve our space here at the storage building. So I would recommend those. Thank you, Justine, very interesting. We're looking forward to your thesis being done, and she's promised to share with me. And yeah, we'll be in touch. Maybe we'll get you to do a pollinator walking association with me. Something about that.
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks so much.
So thank you very much, and thank you, everybody. Feel free to stick around and talk and more coffee. But we really appreciate you all coming to AWS. And I really want to thank our volunteer who helped out tonight. She's the environmental tech student at